So it is now my pleasure to invite Dylan Taylor to the stage. As many of you probably already know, Dylan is a global business leader and philanthropist. He's an active pioneer in the space exploration industry and is CEO, investor, commercial astronaut, which is the coolest, I think. No offense about your other accolades, but that one's pretty cool. And a thought leader and definitely a futurist. Currently, Dylan serves as chairman and CEO of Voyager Space, a multinational space exploration firm that acquires and integrates leading space. We're going to skip that, actually, please. Now it probably makes more sense. Integrates leading space exploration enterprises globally. So without further ado, and now with the correct slide, it is my pleasure to welcome Dylan Thomas to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And we have a lot of content to get through, so I'm going to go ahead and dive in, and we're going to try to save a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So the title is Future of Humanity in Space, Enablers and Impediments. And I really want to emphasize the latter part of that, enablers and impediments, because I really want to spend some time talking about how we turbocharge the industry, but also what the potential pitfalls are. I think it's really important to understand that. But first, let me ask a simple question. What is space exactly? And I've spent pretty much my whole life thinking about this, and it's obviously a lot of different things to different people. It's for sure a technical challenge. One thing you realize being up there is that the entire universe is actually cold and hostile and trying to kill you. And we're in an oasis here. So once you get, once you pierce the veil, so to speak, it really is a very, very harsh environment. And that leads to a lot of the, technology solutions that we all have to develop in order to open up the high frontier. It's also clearly an investment opportunity. I've been invested in the industry since 2008, so quite some time. That was quite early. That's back when you would get a Snicker or two at a cocktail party if you told them you were investing in asteroid mining or something like that. But it certainly is a primetime investment opportunity. Now, it's also a destination, and increasingly, and we'll spend some time talking about this, it's an actual place that you can go. I was there in December, I can vouch for it. But we actually need physical places, more space stations, Moon, Mars, and beyond to actually build resources in space as well. This is the one I'm most passionate about, and a lot of people miss this one. It was touched on a little bit earlier. Space is a tool for transformation. It's a universal phenomenon. It appears to be, whether you're male, female, Asian, Eastern, Western, Russian, American, all the people who have been will tell you that this transforms the way they look at the world. And so it's not only transformation from changing your perspective, but it's also this notion of inspiration. It's this notion of what's next. It's this notion of what humanity can be on this blank canvas that we can paint ourselves onto. So of course the answer is it's all of the above, right? Space is all of those things and more. So why does it matter? Again, different reasons for different people. I think for me, and for a lot of us, it's what's over the hill. We have this gene, many of us do, humanity's been based upon it. What do we not know? What can we learn that we haven't yet discovered? I think that's a key part of what makes us human. Also, the promise of gain, right? The gold rush. A lot of people kind of graft their hopes and dreams onto future endeavors. I think that's natural. But to me, it's also a new paradigm, as I mentioned. It inspires us, and it allows us to reimagine what humanity can be. So I don't want to lose sight of that, because I think that's what draws a lot of people to the industry. But it also fundamentally represents the best of us, right? If I think about a NASA astronaut, not a commercial astronaut, but a NASA astronaut, and all the training and selection that they went through, those are inspiring people. I think those represent the best of humanity, and I think we can all rally behind the tip of the spear, if you will, because you think about the thousands of people that make a NASA mission go, it's inspiring. James Webb Telescope, that's another great example. So what's your why? I'll challenge you, and at the end of this, I'm going to have a call to action, but you should think about, I think, what is your why? Why are you in this room? What inspires you? What part of this can you graft onto? Because I think that'll help you inspire others as well. All right, so how are we going to do this? Space is hard. It's been said many, many times before. To me, the key thing is to harness innovation. Innovation's a key word because a lot of this stuff we have not discovered yet. We need solutions to problems yet to be determined, but we need to assemble capability. The third part of that is in an economically useful way. So if it's not sustainable, if it's purely a government endeavor, we're not going to have the flywheel effect that we need to have a healthy ecosystem. So let's drill down a little bit on that. And again, I just want to emphasize social change. Why does social change matter? Because a lot of these resources are supported by the public, and we have to bring the entire public along on this endeavor. It can't be an insider baseball, kind of nebulous topic. And remember the impact Apollo 8 had. Those were the first images from the moon. I wasn't alive at this time, but this led to the Earthrise photo. So if we think about the environmental movement, if we think about how we think about ourselves, this all was enabled by that mission. Okay, so let's not lose sight of that. All right, so let's just to emphasize, if you change the context, you can change the mindset. So I think we use space as a tool to have people better understand what's possible. All right, let's talk about the market. I think a lot of this has probably been covered by other speakers, but we are going hockey stick, right? Every business plan that's ever been written always shows the classic, spike, the hockey stick. We're actually hitting that point now. It really is real in space. Here's a chart that has been presented probably before. It shows us going to $1 trillion plus in 2040. Lots of investment banks have this pegged anywhere between $1 trillion and $3 trillion by either 2030 or 2040. It doesn't really matter. The point is it's going to be massive, right? We're talking about adding, an economy the size of, Spain on top of this market over the next 10 years. Let's talk a little bit about disruption. I think this is a really key point that a lot of people don't necessarily understand. And, with deference to people who might be in more traditional roles within the industry, what ends up happening in industry dynamics is you always have this S-curve. Rapid growth with a little bit of a settling out. You end up typically with what's an oligopoly at the top. If you think about accounting firms, the big four, investment banks, the big four, consulting firms, the big four, aerospace primes, the big four. That's natural. That's the natural state of things. It's sort of the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the market share is 20% of the companies. And that's a good thing by and large because it creates stability, it creates resources. You can sort of orient the industry around these lighthouses, if you will. The disadvantage is those companies tend to calcify. They become very big, very slow moving, and it's hard for them to innovate. And by the way, if you talk to, and many of you either work at those companies or know people who do, if you talk to the people running those companies, they know that as well. It's just they can't effectuate change because it's quite complicated. And I want to have a and conversation, not an or conversation. So this isn't about ripping that big four apart at all. It's about supporting that big four with additional innovation. And that's when you get this disruptive phase. That's when you get the new entrants. That's the, if you will, the Mac to the Microsoft. And I've got a couple of examples of that. And it actually challenges both genres. It challenges the new genre to be better and to make products that are more technically capable, but it also challenges the old guard to be more innovative and to make sure that they're not resting on their laurels. So this is a good thing. This is healthy. All industries go through it. So here's a graph. If you have read the book Innovator's Dilemma, it was written by Clayton Christensen, a Harvard professor who passed away a couple of years ago. It's a brilliant book, but he covers a lot of this sort of innovator's dilemma. The notion is that if you're part of the market leadership, it's very hard to disrupt yourself. Because a lot of people ask the question, well, if everyone recognizes you need more innovation, why don't these large companies actually do the disruption? And the answer is it's very, very difficult because of the incentive structures and the training and the people they hire to do that. But the key point on this slide is, and it's an insight a lot of people miss, disruption always comes from the bottom end. It always comes from the lowest use case. And I've given this presentation or version of it a couple hundred times, and I've been asked, well, what about Tesla? Tesla is disrupting from the top. Not true. Tesla is only getting traction because of the Model 3, right? Which is really more of it's expensive, but it's really more of an entry-level car in terms of technology goes. What ends up happening, though, and the key part of this graph is, as innovation gets traction, and as those use cases create economics, so they're getting economic benefit from those very lowest use cases, and they reinvest that technology in innovation, the product gets better and better and better, and you reach a point where you get an inflection. And that inflection is the product of the new entrant is not as good still, but is good enough, and the price difference is so dramatically different that the whole market inverts. And basically, the whole market turns over. And we're seeing this happen with launch. This is exactly what's happened with the launch market. So here's a graph. I won't test you on what it is because there's a key down at the bottom, but the flatter light blue line is PC sales. Personal computers, this predates laptop for the younger people in the room. And the sharp blue line that goes up parabolic there are smartphones. So if I would have told you, let's say in 2006, that your compact PC on your desktop and your Pentax camera that cost $800 would be disrupted by your Motorola flip phone or your Palm Pilot, you would have said, I'm crazy. But of course, that's exactly what has happened. And not only did it surpass PCs, but it's dramatically expanded the market. So I now think there are 2 billion smartphone users in the world. There are more people who have smartphones than access to reliable, clean water on a daily basis. It's just absolutely extraordinary. Okay, so what are the disruptors happening in space? If you buy into the thesis that this is an industry trend that repeats itself, and you buy into the thesis that this is happening in space, what are the key disruptors that are happening in space? And I want to talk about them in terms of enablers. So they're disruptors if you're part of the old guard, but they're enablers in terms of opening up this industry, democratizing this industry, creating jobs, creating economic value. So the first and foremost, I think most people would know this, is launch reusability. And think about what we've been doing for the last 60 years, right? It's like boarding an A380 in Boston, flying it to Dubai, and at the end of the flight throwing the plane away. Right, a $350 million plane. That's what we've been doing for 60 years. It's just absolutely insane. And so for me, and I had the privilege of being at this launch, it all changed on the Falcon Heavy launch, February of 18. This was the classic dual rocket booster landing. This is the only time in my life where I actually had to rub my eyes to determine, did I really see that? So this is really an extraordinary achievement, and I can tell you before SpaceX landed their first booster, I was at the World Economic Forum meeting in Switzerland, and I was with a CEO of one of the major space companies, and this was about 2 weeks before SpaceX originally landed their booster, and he said, Dylan, launch reusability is a fool's errand. It will never happen. They're wasting their time. They're wasting their money. And so you ask yourself, is that person not smart? Do they not understand physics? No, they're super smart. They understand physics. But when you're in that world, it's very hard to see it objectively from the outside. And of course, I think it's now 91 boosters. It might even be more that they've landed. SpaceX is now launching every 5 days, which is unbelievable. And it's dramatically disrupted the economics. So round numbers, $100,000 for a bottle of water, right? That's kind of by definition a pound to orbit on the space shuttle. If you look at some of the vehicles we have with ULA and others, it's round numbers, 10,000. We're on our way to $1,000 a pound, even sub $1,000 a pound, and that's before Starship. I had the privilege of being down, and by the way, this is not an advertisement for SpaceX. There's a lot of other great companies, but I am inspired by this because I was down in Boca Chica for 3 days doing a deep dive and looking at the technology to see if SpaceX Starship is real, and I'm convinced it's going to happen. And if it happens, a single Starship can launch more mass to orbit in a year than all the mass we've put collectively as humanity in the last 60 years, and can do it for about $500 a pound. So imagine a world where basically access to space is free, in quotes. Major, major, major disruptor. But what it's enabled is we can put hardware in space reliably, much less expensively. And so this has revolutionized the hardware in microsatellite space. And we're building towards what I call the mega set. So worldview, one on the bottom or far left there, that's now, that's former digital globe. It's now called Maxar, but this is a large spy satellite, if you will. It's about the size of a school bus. This is sort of the classic satellite that will take a picture of your license plate from orbit, that sort of thing. And on the far right, you have Planet, which is a startup based in the Bay Area that are building essentially football-sized optical satellites. So again, back to the use case thing that we were talking about. When the Dove satellite first came out, the images were grainy, much worse, if you will, in quotes, than the Maxar images, and would only be available to maybe retail uses of optical imagery. Well, as that has improved, because keep in mind, they can launch new satellites every year, whereas the Worldview satellite might be launched every decade, they can iterate. They can get on Moore's Law. They can put in electronics that don't have to last 10, 12, 15 years. And they've now reached a point where they're now capturing a lot of that intelligence market. A lot of the images coming out of the Ukraine and a lot of the images actually used by the Ukraine military were from Planet, were from ISI, were from a lot of these satellite startups. So again, it's being totally revolutionized, and I think we're going to put more satellites in orbit in 2022 than all the previous hardware put in orbit since the beginning of time. SpaceX alone is going to put about 1,800 Starlink satellites up in 2022, and they put about 1,800 up in 2021. So it's really going parabolic. So what does this mean? And this is a key emphasis for what I think you all should consider focusing on. The most capitally efficient business models are ones and zeros, right? It's software, it's predictive analytics. And because we're building what I call the mega set, I think this is going to be a massive, massive, massive opportunity. So the mega set is hyperspectral. All that means is you're going to have different data layers from different types of information, whether it's optical or infrared or whatever the case may be, SAR, which is synthetic aperture radar. You're going to be able to have the benefit of getting that information down quicker, because instead of just the K-band infrastructure, which is we're getting ones and zeros down today, you have things like laser communications and other advanced technologies. We now have machine learning and AI that we didn't have 10 years ago, right? If you look at the clouds at AWS or Microsoft Azure or some of the others, it's extraordinary the cloud-based technology and AI that we have. And I think it's a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. And my analogy is, if you think about Google as an example, Google is a trillion-dollar company, or Alphabet, their parent is, and they essentially have organized known terrestrial information, right? If you want to know what a restaurant's rating is, what the hours are, or how to get there on a map, it'll tell you. What it won't tell you is what restaurant might open in 2 weeks' time or 2 months' time. It won't speculate on the future. Well, with AI and machine learning and a ubiquitous, persistent database of the Earth monitoring all of global commerce, I posit that we're going to be able to do much more predictive analytics. So if you're a shipper in Singapore and you're trying to move product to London, it'll tell you ahead of time you're going to be stuck at the Panama Canal, because all of the ships in transit right now and all the transportation system, there's going to be a bottleneck next Tuesday, and you should reroute. So if you think of it from a global commerce standpoint, if we have a $75 trillion global economy, can we make the economy 2%, 3%, 4% more efficient by having perfect information about global commerce, space-based data? And I say yes. And if that's true, that's a $2 or $3 million value creation opportunity. Now, how that all gets put together, who the winners and losers are, what particular constellation to bet on is anybody's guess. But think of it as e-commerce or some of these other mega trends that we've seen in our lifetime. This is coming. And this is going to be a multi-trillion-dollar value creation opportunity. And I think it's going to, in many respects, be bigger than the e-commerce revolution that we had. And then the third, that I think this is fun, but I think it's also important from a public perception of space. We're disrupting space tourism dramatically. And this is changing right before our eyes. So just to define space, this is a bit controversial in and of itself, but the Kármán line is 100 kilometers or 62 miles above orbit. I'm in the camp that says space starts about 52 miles because I'm in the camp that says space is whenever you don't have aerodynamic lift. Like space is the definition of not having atmosphere. So depending on your view, these numbers will be slightly different, but that's the official boundary line for space. And at the beginning of last year, we had 591 people who had been to space. At the end of last year, we had 611. So we minted, depending on what numbers you use, anywhere between 19 and 25 astronauts last year. That's extraordinary. That's 611 is since the beginning of time, right? Since the beginning of the space program. And just to give you a sense, 611 people, these are people, by the way, who've been to space, but not deep enough to actually see the whole Earth in black space. Only 24 people have been that deep. 24 people have been so deep in space that they could sort of cover the Earth with their thumb, and only 12 have walked on the moon. And you think about this in terms of 110 billion people who have ever lived, round numbers. I find this extraordinary. And just, for comparison, this billionaire number moves around probably daily, but let's say there's 2,500 billionaires on planet Earth, about 1,000 Nobel Prize winners since the prize was created. You're more likely to be a billionaire or a Nobel Prize winner than to be an astronaut, which I just find extraordinary. But again, that is changing. So previously it's been $50 million to get up there. It's still $50 million depending on who you go with and depending on how long you stay. But what's really revolutionizing it is these suborbital flights. So this is Spaceport America, New Mexico, with the Virgin Galactic plane. For those of you who don't know, this is a plane that flies the spacecraft to 50,000 feet, and then you get a drop maneuver where the spacecraft drops, then the rocket engines fire, and it's going to basically do a little bit of a parabola into space and then drift back down and land like an airplane. So pretty cool. I mean, if you like rockets and you like space planes and you like this sort of thing, I think it's extraordinary. And then the one I flew on is Blue Origin. I think most of you would be familiar with this one. This is a rocket straight up and down. The capsule detaches, and you're basically going quite high. I think we went to 106 kilometers. So you really are seeing the Earth from space. I mean, it really is unbelievable. And then that capsule will land back down on terra firma with parachutes in the Texas desert. I think that's actually me in one of the windows there, actually the one closest to us. And that capsule is quite interesting because the windows are massive. And so you really get an appreciation for, in fact, I think I might have been the only person to go because I asked for permission to actually rotate my head in the seat where I could actually see the Earth fall away. Because if you think about all other spacecraft, the Soyuz, Space Shuttle, Dragon, the window is not at your seat. So they're all hanging on for dear life as they're going up, but they're not actually seeing anything out the window. So if you get a chance to do this, highly, 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 highly recommend it. Life changer. And, just for fun, I thought I'd point this out. So the top left there are the astronaut wings for NASA, for the Air Force, and for the Navy. Those were the previous wings that were awarded to astronauts. Bottom center is the universal insignia of the Association of Space Explorers. So everyone who goes to space gets that. The middle center is the FAA Commercial Astronaut Wings, which they just terminated that program as of December 31st. I was fortunate, I just squeaked in to get those. And then on the right side are all the commercial ones. So top right is the Virgin Galactic wings, middle right is the Blue Origin wings, and bottom right is the SpaceX Dragon wings. So the point is you have a flourishing of all these different vehicles going to space. And I think this is fascinating. To me, we're living in the future, that we're creating these opportunities. This was the FAA wing ceremony that I participated in. The reason I wanted to show this is middle center on the right-hand side there in the red jacket is Wally Funk. And we were talking, I'll try not to get emotional here, but we were talking about diversity in this industry. And Wally really was a pioneer in this industry. She should have been a NASA astronaut. Because of discrimination, she wasn't able to go. And the fact that she was able to fly and get her wings at age 89, I think she was. I think is extraordinary. So anyway, I think this is the power of space to open up these opportunities. And, you know, there's a lot of men on that stage, but hopefully we can further diversify this industry. Just some more photo ops here. The top left there, that was in Colorado Springs last week or the week before. They did the wing ceremony for Richard Branson. And, you know, to see someone of his level of success, who's, you know, checked the box on a lot of activities, and how emotional he got in going through the ceremony, I think it's just symbolic of the power of space to transform. And the prices will fall. They're not 400,000 today. I can't unfortunately talk about it, but it's a big number. But eventually we're going to head to that number. It's still unreachable for most people. So one of the things I spend a lot of time talking about or thinking about is how do we democratize it. I've founded a nonprofit called Space for Humanity, which we're going to actually pay for diverse citizen astronauts to go to space in exchange for coming back and essentially doing a fellowship and trying to make the world better. So the motto is to space to benefit Earth. And yeah, hopefully we can live in a world where everyone believes that they can be an astro. All right. Let's dive into impediments. So we talked about the inspirational side. We've talked about these disruptors that are enabling space to flourish. We've talked about how launch and how hardware in space and how the data set is going to revolutionize economics in the industry. What are the pitfalls? What should we be aware of? What should we be concerned about? So I call them the 4 horsemen of space finance. Just kind of a catchy little title, but they're really 4 things that I think are unique to space or particularly emphasized in space. One is the illiquidity, typically, of the investments. The second is the risk. The third is high capital expenditure, and the fourth is long time horizons. So let's talk a little bit about, and I won't hopefully bore you guys on this, but I think it is important. Let's talk a little bit about investments in general. And the key point on this slide is you've all heard no risk, no reward, right? So if you want something super, super, super safe, which would be a money market account bottom left, that's great, it's safe. It's liquid, but it's also a very low return. On the way extreme, top right is private equity, where you're going to get a very high expected return, but you're also going to be quite illiquid, and there's a lot of variability to that investment, right? And that's why typically when you're doing riskier investments, you want to have a portfolio approach. You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket, because as you diversify those investments, you smooth out your risk curve. So really the point here is to show you kind of the bookends, if you will. But the other thing to notice here is private equity is actually listed here as riskier than emerging market public equity. So why is that the case? Well, it's really this notion of being illiquid. So when you have a private investment, you can't sell, you know, daily. You're not able to sort of liquidate your stock, and that creates some disadvantages to that investment. Generally speaking, equity is more risky but has a higher return than debt. I think we all understand that. Okay, so if you look at a curve, this is kind of a traditional risk versus reward curve mapped on with the capital required and with a typical company's revenue where they start getting traction. What you can see is when the risk is the highest, there's basically no revenue or pre-revenue, and capital is actually required in order to drive the revenue. So this is why so many companies have such a hard time getting off the ground. That's why you'll see that those first capital sources are typically grants, angel investors, people who are willing to take quite a bit of risk on the front end. But you'll notice venture capital, which I know you had a panel yesterday, they typically won't enter a market like that. So when I first started investing in the industry back in 2008, 2009, that's really where we were. And a lot of people were lamenting the fact we need more venture capital, we need more high-end investors. And I was trying to explain to folks that until you incubate companies to a level where venture capitalists can underwrite it, you're going to be in that catch-22 scenario. And so that's why we spent so much time on that early stage part of investment. Well, thankfully, we've moved quite a bit to the right. And so in 2022, I would say the angel capital market is healthy. The venture capital market is healthy. although they're fickle, right? Sometimes they're in love with a particular project or industry, and sometimes they're not. What we now need is really more public company exits, because when you get either company sales or public company exits, you return the capital to the initial shareholders and you complete the flywheel. So as you think about this initiative and you think about your region and you think about investments you want to make, pay particular emphasis on how are you recycling capital, right? Because a lot of markets around the country do a good job of incubating companies, but then they're sold off to another company in another region, or they go public and move to Dallas, or whatever the case may be. So I think it's important to think about that life cycle of capital. It's really important, I think, that we have more exits in order to continue to keep the industry healthy. So back to the four horsemen, I'm going to drill down on sort of how we can mitigate what I see are the four impediments. So space is risky and illiquid. Risky meaning the outcomes are indeterminate. We have technical risk, we have financial risk, we have customer risk. Sometimes the customer's NASA, sometimes NASA changes its priorities. So there is some riskiness to it, and typically your investment's going to be tied up for years, not months. The time horizons are long, and oftentimes these projects are capital intensive. Now the good news is, right, those are kind of the disadvantages. Good news is the returns are off the charts, literally off the charts. So you can 10x, 20x, 30x, 100x your money if you're an investor. If you're a economy that's looking to create jobs, you can get a tiger by the tail like a SpaceX or a Blue Origin and get thousands of jobs. These are incredibly high-paying jobs. So the risk is high, but the reward is also quite high. What I think, and why I think it's so important to have the initiative you guys are all focused on, is there's a lot of different things we can do to mitigate these four horsemen. And so a lot of it has to do with collaboration. So let's talk about that. What we first need to do, I think, is identify and understand those four horsemen. People need to understand what those impediments are. They need to be able to talk about them. They need to be able to whiteboard and strategize around them. Another key thing, and I think you all can have a huge impact on this, is we need more standards. So part of the challenge we have is we're going back to the drawing board almost every time for key projects. There are so many brilliant entrepreneurs who have left Lockheed or Boeing, formed their own company, created some great IP, some great ideas, couldn't quite get exit or escape velocity, decided they're going to go back and work for a large employer, and all that IP and all that technology and everything that's been done is scrap heaped, and no one knows about it. It's not being fed into the collective, so to speak. Furthermore, if we had industry standards to design cycles would be quicker. Right? We've seen this in automotive and other large supply chain-based industries. So I think we need more industry consortiums. We need more discussions on standards. This is everything from grappling fixtures in space to size envelopes and everything else. Permitting, everything you can think of. We need to minimize flameouts. I was talking to someone earlier at breakfast that space is sort of notorious for flashes in the pan, right? This company is going to be the next big thing, and the next thing you know, they're out of money and they're out of business. And that's really been space's reputation in the VC community up until about 2015, 2016. We've now, I think, emerged from that. It's seen as investable, it's seen as credible. But if we had a couple of high-profile bankruptcies or flameouts, it could really hurt all of us, the collective us. So I think we really need to minimize that. We need to, I think, separate the wheat from the chaff. I call them PowerPoint companies. There's a lot of companies who have a great PowerPoint, but not particularly good capabilities or technologies. And I think we need to segregate the industry and determine who's real and who's not, and just be really authentic to that. And then build more scale. Part of the reason I am working for the company I do, Voyager, the whole notion there is that new space is real, but we're not scaling it particularly well. So the whole idea here is how do you assemble capability? Because if we're going to do these large infrastructure projects like space stations and the like, we're going to need to have all the right capability assembled in order to pull off projects like that. So building scale is really, really important. And then success stories. So I think to the extent that we can case study, and I think Astrobotic's a great one, but there's a lot of companies that have thrived and benefited from collaboration, and I think we need to amplify those stories and use them as templates to create other success stories around the country and around the world. Okay, so just wrapping up here before we get to Q&A, just an observation. I like to kind of predict the future a little bit. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm not. But I think, and I just think this is fascinating, I think we are going to, well, actually, let me finish with this, and then I'll talk about my prediction. So one thing that I've observed is the companies with the capability in our industry typically have lacked ambition, and the companies with the ambition have typically lacked capability. And so one of the things I think we should orient ourselves towards is we need to create companies that have both of those, right? Capability first, but also the ambition to really push the envelope, because that's where we're going to create value together. All right, let me just talk about my prediction here. It's probably not that controversial, but I think 2022 will be another big year for minting astronauts. But I think 2023, when Virgin's flying monthly and Blue's flying weekly maybe, and SpaceX is flying passengers and Axiom and everybody else, I think we're going to mint more astronauts in 2023, which is next year, of course, than any decade previously in humanity's history. So the point here is we're going completely parabolic. And I think, 10 years from now, all of you in this room will know, either have been to space or know someone 1 degree of separation has been to space. And I think that's a good thing. All right, so let's do a call to action. Whenever I present, I always want to leave you thinking, but I also want to challenge you to do something. And this industry is a great industry. The relationships are genuine, and the people are good people. And so I think if we all focus on one or a few of these things, I would appreciate it. But I would challenge you to build something useful. And build is the key verb here, right? Actually build something, physical in this world that contributes to the industry. Or write something. Some of you are more on the creative side. Not that these are mutually exclusive, but we need a lot more thought leadership in this industry. We need more lessons learned from other industries. So write something. There are plenty of publications out there that will get your thoughts out there. One particularly important to me is lift someone up. And that could be educate somebody, it could be mentor someone. We need more mentors in this industry for sure. Or inspire, right? Or better yet, do all three. So with that, I would love to answer any questions you might have. I think we might need a mic there, yeah. How much time do we have?
Okay, Dylan, we've actually met before. One of the things that you had on your slides there showing the S-curves is something I have been grabbing people and trying to basically stick their nose in it. That what are we going to do when we've got 100 tons to orbit for under $10 million leaving every week? It just changes everything, right. And I see that as big opportunity.
I agree. And in fact, when I came back from Boca Chica on the visit I mentioned earlier, I told my team, I said, imagine a world where launch is free. Imagine a world where launch is free. How do you make money and how do you play in that industry? And so I think we're headed to something very similar to that. And I know that sounds outrageous and a lot of people are like, that's impossible. But if we really are 500 pounds to orbit, the forcing function will not be launch costs, right? And if we can launch daily, the forcing function won't be launch cadence or schedule. So I agree with you, but that's where I think we can reimagine this space-based infrastructure, right? If you think about the three areas that I see that we need to lay railroad tracks in from an infrastructure, and there are the three areas that Voyager Space, the company I run, are focused on. The first are destinations, right? Physically, places to go in commercial LEO. I think you had a panel on that yesterday. The second is this whole notion of orbital servicing, right? Space debris is a big issue. Classic tragedy of the commons. We really have no technologies to, if we have another AST event by Russia or China, we have no ability to clean that up. So I think orbital servicing in general is an important topic. And then the third is what I would call cislunar infrastructure, because you get out to GEO basically anything from geo to the moon, there is no infrastructure, right? GPS looks down, not up, right? So you have no position, navigation, or timing. You have no energy distribution. Your communications protocols are very limited. So I think we need to lay a lot of infrastructure between geo and the moon. And then further afield, the moon itself, and of course Mars. But I agree with your point of view. Good question. Yes?
Dylan, first off, thank you so much for those comments, inspirational.
Sure.
So as a lawyer, I work with young companies. We drive investments across the board, so I resonate with a lot of those slides. Would love to get your observations on, we are in a unique geopolitical time. You know, we're facing a Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Right.
We are looking at, you know, stellar inflation in this country, energy crises, et cetera. How do you see, and we just came off of 2 of the biggest SPAC years in space that I would say created somewhat of a chilling effect on the market because of PowerPoint presentation companies, as you put them.
Right.
What do you see? What's your forecast on how this affects and impacts the space investment landscape?
Great question. Fortunately, I don't see the geopolitics impacting space too much right now. Inflation is an issue, but it's more of an issue for profitability, not the revenue side. It's more on the cost side. I think the industry is going to, so if you buy into the thesis that we have, and I don't particularly like these terms, but old space and new space, if you buy into that paradigm, I think new space is going to further fragment between companies that are real and companies that aren't. And a lot of people, you know, back to pricing, they'll say, well, it's a race to the bottom and we have all these companies and they're all going to be competing for business and no one's going to make any money. I think it's the exact opposite. I think that the companies that actually have the capability to deliver on these projects is much less than people realize. And I think if you have capability, your capability is going to trade at a premium. But we have to have that shakeout. And, you know, fortunately, there are companies that are real with real capability and real tech. Unfortunately, there's lots that don't have that. And so just as, you know, folks in the room that are looking to create jobs and focus on economic development, I think the diligence is important. You know, who's real, who's not. It's a small industry, so I think by and large, if people are being straightforward with you, you'll be able to sniff it out. But it's a really important consideration. So tale of 2 industries, if you will, or tale of 3 industries. I think old space will be healthy because they're resilient and they have the girth. But new space is going to bifurcate into who's real and who's not. If you're not real, you're in this market, you will not survive because you won't be able to raise more capital to kind of smooth over your deficiencies. But if you do have capability, I think you're going to trade at a premium, and I think you're going to do incredibly well. Sure. Yes,
Dylan,
Bernie.
let me add on to the thanks. You've kind of taken me back to our 8 o'clock Monday morning meetings at Space Florida, our internal team huddles. We talked a lot about everything you just went through. Our whole tri-state region, a lot of the wealth here, the big time wealth, it traces back a century, sometimes even more. Coal, steel, timber, things like that. And, you know, just speaking from personal experience, that type of money can be extremely conservative with a small c. And being interested in your thoughts, first, is it even worth approaching those type of potential investors? And if that's a yes, how do you get them comfortable with something, you know, like commercial space?
I think, ironically, Bernie, I think those kinds of investors might be well suited for space. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but if you think about mining, for example, heavy capex with big payoff in the future, which is uncertain, looks a lot like space infrastructure projects. You know, oil and gas, I mean, this is part of the reason why I think Texas is getting as much traction as they are, is because a lot of their investors are used to speculative high capex investments in oil and gas. So, you know, I think the capital markets are evolving as well. Bernie, I mean, a lot of the wealth, my perception in the tri-state area, a lot of the wealth is concentrated into family offices as opposed to institutions. And I'm a member of a couple of family office organizations. My family office is a member of it. I would tell you they're getting way more out on the risk curve. And part of that is they're getting overcharged by a lot of their advisors on institutional investments. So they're doing a lot more direct investments. So I'm actually optimistic that the old guard, kind of the old money, if you will, is going to be more open to at least a portion of their investments being in space. So if anyone needs, thoughts or help on that, on talking points, I'd be very happy to sit down with someone and, do a workshop or a whiteboard session, because I spend a lot of time thinking about this as well. And I'm actually more optimistic about it, Bernie. I really am. Yeah. Maybe one more. Sorry, I'll make it quick.
So you were talking about companies needing ambition with capability. How do you think we can prevent them from having too much ambition, even if they have the capability, with what we kind of saw with the space race and what kind of led to the Challenger incident? How can we make sure that the ambition isn't too much?
Yeah, that's a super smart question. Checks and balances, governance, hire the right people, make sure the incentives aren't perverse. There's huge outsized benefits if you win and no consequences if you lose. Those would be the key things that I would focus on. Ultimately, leadership matters, right? So make sure that the people in the chair making the decisions are of the right ethos. I think that's the answer. Great question, though. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.